Dr. Eleanor Vance, a clinical psychologist renowned for her unwavering composure, had built a fortress around her heart. She was a master of 1,000 minds, but a stranger to her own. Her days were a symphony of control and professional detachment, a performance she had perfected over a decade of practice. Yet, beneath the calm surface, a wild, untamed current of desire pulsed within her, a hunger she had long denied. One stormy evening, as the city of Boston was plunged into darkness, she found herself alone with Dr. Liam Carter, a charismatic cardiologist whose gaze was as disarming as his smile. With every flicker of lightning, every rumble of thunder, the walls of her fortress began to crack. She was not just a doctor tonight. She was a woman consumed by a powerful, undeniable force. She would not let this moment pass. With a single, daring glance, she decided to shed her professional mask and give in to the thrilling, terrifying urge to let go. This was not a moment for logic or reason, but a surrender to the most powerful of human desires, connection. And she would not be the only one to fall. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a clinical psychologist renowned for her unwavering composure and sharp intellect, found her professional mask slipping. The sterile white walls of her Boston practice seemed to close in on her as she listened to the raw confession of her patient, a young woman named Sarah. Sarah spoke of a deep-seated loneliness, a gnawing ache for intimacy that she felt was unfulfilled. She described the shame of her own unspoken desires, a silent scream buried beneath layers of societal expectation. Eleanor, who had spent years mastering the art of emotional detachment, felt an unfamiliar tremor in her core. She was a master of guiding others through their emotional turmoil, yet she had built a fortress around her own. Sarah's words were not just a case study, they were a mirror. For a fleeting moment, Eleanor saw her own reflection in Sarah's tearful eyes, a woman who had prioritized her career and independence to the point of emotional isolation. The clinical distance she had so carefully maintained began to crack. Just as the session ended, the door to her office swung open. It wasn't a patient, but Dr. Liam Carter, a new cardiologist at the hospital. Liam was everything. Eleanor wasn't radiant, effortlessly charming, and seemingly at ease with the world. He had a disarming smile, and eyes that held a hint of mischief, a stark contrast to Eleanor's reserved demeanor. He leaned against the doorframe, a file tucked under his arm. "Dr. Vance, the storm is supposed to hit hard. They're telling everyone to stay put," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "Looks like we're in for a long evening." Eleanor felt a jolt of something she couldn't name. It was a mix of annoyance at the interruption and a strange, electric awareness of his presence. She disliked being caught off guard, especially in a state of professional vulnerability. She forced a smile, a practiced movement that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you for the update, Dr. Carter. I appreciate it." Liam's gaze lingered on her for a moment too long. "Are you all right? You look deep in thought." His question was simple, but it felt like an intrusion. Eleanor stiffened. "I'm fine. Just a long day." "I get it," he said, his tone softening. "The walls of this place can feel a little suffocating sometimes, especially when it's just you and your thoughts." He wasn't prying. He was acknowledging a shared reality. He seemed to see past her carefully constructed facade, a perception that both unnerved and intrigued her. He excused himself, leaving her to the echoing silence of her office. As the rain began to lash against the window panes, Eleanor sat alone in her chair, the file on her desk a blur. Sarah's words replayed in her mind, mingling with the image of Liam leaning against her doorframe. The professional distance she had so fiercely guarded felt fragile, as if a single gust of wind could shatter it. The fortress of her self-control was showing its first hairline fracture. She found herself consumed by a chaotic swirl of thoughts and sensations. A professional who was losing her grip. A woman who felt a stir of something she had long denied herself. The sterile environment of the hospital, usually a sanctuary of order and logic, now felt like a cage. The silence was deafening, amplified by the drumming rain outside. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something significant, something that had the potential to change everything she had ever known about herself. The emotional dam she had built was not just cracked, it was beginning to crumble. Liam's unexpected presence had been the catalyst. His casual observation had unknowingly breached her defenses, and now she was left with the disquieting realization that she was not as in control of her emotions as she had always believed. As the storm raged outside, a different kind of storm brewed within her, a tempest of long-suppressed desires and a startling new awareness of her own vulnerability. The evening was just beginning, and for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt a tremor of anticipation, a nervous energy that hinted at the unknown. The professional and personal aspects of her life, once neatly separated, were on a collision course, and there was no turning back. The city of Boston was swallowed by a tempest. The rain, once a gentle patter, now hammered against the hospital's glass facade, a furious drumming that seemed to match the chaotic rhythm inside Eleanor. The corridors were eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by the groan of the wind and the distant rumble of thunder. Eleanor sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her face as she tried to focus on patient notes. But her mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Sarah, and then to Liam's piercing gaze. He had been right. The hospital, her sanctuary, felt suffocating, and the isolation, once a comfortable blanket, now felt like a heavy shroud. A flicker of something new and unsettling danced within her, a yearning for connection that she hadn't acknowledged in years. She stood up, feeling restless, and walked to the large window overlooking the stormy city. The streetlights flickered and went out, plunging the world outside into a monochrome of gray and black. Just then, a flash of lightning illuminated the hallway, and in that fleeting moment, she saw Liam. He was walking towards her office, a large travel mug in his hand. He stopped at her door and offered a small, hesitant smile. "Thought you might want some coffee. It's going to be a long night." Eleanor was momentarily speechless. His gesture was simple, yet it felt monumental. It was a breach of the professional boundary she had built so carefully, a subtle act of intimacy that she was completely unprepared for. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice softer than she intended. She took the mug, her fingers brushing against his. The contact was brief, but a jolt of warmth shot up her arm. "No problem," he said, his smile widening slightly. "It's decaf. Figured you might need to sleep eventually." He hadn't left. He just stood there, his presence filling the space, his casual confidence, a stark contrast to her own growing nervousness. "The storm's pretty intense," she said, just to fill the silence. "It is," he agreed, leaning against the wall next to her office door. "My apartment is on the 17th floor. I'm expecting some pretty spectacular views when I finally get home." They fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, as they watched the relentless rain. It wasn't awkward. It was a quiet space for two people to simply exist. Eleanor found herself relaxing, her rigid posture softening. She felt a magnetic pull towards him, an energy that was both thrilling and terrifying. She had always prided herself on being in control, but with Liam, she felt a powerful, undeniable force pushing her to step outside her comfort zone. Suddenly, a loud crack of thunder rattled the windows. The lights in the hallway flickered once, then went out completely. The emergency lights kicked on, casting a dim orange glow. The silence was now absolute, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the howling wind. Eleanor let out a shaky breath. "Well, this is new." Liam chuckled softly in the darkness. "I'm not so sure. The hospital's been through worse. We'll be fine." "I'm not worried about the power," Eleanor admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm worried about this." She gestured vaguely between the two of them. "I'm a therapist. I'm supposed to be helping people with their emotions, not dealing with my own." Liam stepped closer, and in the dim light, she could see the genuine concern in his eyes. "Eleanor, it's okay to be human. It's okay to feel things. You're not just a doctor. You're a person." His words struck a chord. She had spent so long compartmentalizing her life, keeping her personal and professional selves separate, that she had forgotten what it was like to simply be. The walls she had built had protected her, but they had also trapped her. And now, in the midst of a storm, a part of her was craving to be free. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. The dim light softened the sharp angles of his face, highlighting the kindness in his eyes. He wasn't just a charming colleague. He was someone who saw her, who seemed to understand her on a level that no one else ever had. A powerful desire, a need for connection, coursed through her veins. It was raw and undeniable. This wasn't a desire for a fleeting moment, but a deep-seated longing for a genuine connection with another person. She felt a wild, reckless impulse to simply let go. Eleanor took a step forward, closing the small distance between them. "I feel restless," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I feel like a part of me has been locked away for so long, and now it's trying to get out." Liam didn't flinch. He just watched her, his expression a mixture of understanding and quiet anticipation. He knew what she was talking about. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the raw honesty in her words, and he didn't exploit it. He simply met her where she was, offering a space of safety and acceptance. "I see it," he said, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "I see a lot more than you think." His words were not a threat, but a promise. A promise that he saw her not as a doctor, but as a woman with a rich inner world and a soul full of complexities. And in that moment, Eleanor knew that the rules had changed. The professional distance, the careful detachment, the fortress of solitude, it all felt insignificant. The only thing that mattered was the connection between them. A silent conversation held in the dim, flickering light of an empty hospital. The storm outside raged on, but inside, a new and different kind of storm was just beginning. It was a storm of 1,000 emotions, a tempest of possibility, and Eleanor was ready to face it head on. She was no longer just the doctor. She was a woman, and she was ready to feel. The dim, flickering emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, turning the familiar hospital hallway into a labyrinth of secrets. Eleanor stood facing Liam, the silence between them charged with an unspoken understanding. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, a tantalizing mix of apprehension and exhilaration. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of her own desire. "I see a lot more than you think," Liam's words echoed in her mind. He hadn't moved, but his presence felt more intense than ever. Eleanor, the master of emotional control, found herself at a loss for words. Her usual defenses, the carefully constructed walls of professional detachment, were crumbling. She was no longer a therapist in her office. She was just Eleanor, a woman in the dark with a man who saw her more clearly than anyone had before. "What do you see?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was a question born of raw curiosity, a leap of faith into the unknown. Liam's smile was gentle, a subtle curve of his lips that held no hint of mockery. "I see a woman who is incredibly strong, who carries the weight of so many people's emotions on her shoulders. But I also see a woman who is tired of being so strong all the time. I see a part of you that wants to be seen, not as Dr. Vance, but as Eleanor." His words were a revelation. He didn't just see her professional facade. He saw the person beneath it. He wasn't talking about physical desire, but a deeper, more profound kind of connection. It was a seduction of the mind, a game of emotional chess that was far more powerful than any physical one could ever be. He wasn't trying to tear down her defenses. He was inviting her to open them herself. "And what about you, Dr. Carter?" Eleanor challenged, her voice a little more steady. "What do you want to be seen as? A handsome, charming doctor who's just passing the time during a storm?" Liam's smile didn't falter. "You're trying to put up your walls again, Eleanor. It's a habit you're good at. But I'm not interested in a game of professional pleasantries. I'm interested in the real you." He took a step closer, not a move of aggression, but one of quiet intent. "I'm a cardiologist. My job is to listen to the heart. And right now, I think both of our hearts have something to say." He wasn't wrong. Eleanor's heart was speaking volumes, a symphony of emotions she had suppressed for so long. She felt a powerful urge to run, to retreat back into the safety of her office. But a stronger impulse, a primal curiosity held her in place. This was a unique moment, a chance to explore a connection that felt unlike anything she had ever experienced. Tell me something personal, Liam, she said, raising the stakes. Something you haven't told anyone else. Liam's eyes twinkled in the dim light. He accepted her challenge. I moved to Boston to get away from a bad breakup. I thought a new city, a new job, would fix everything. But it turns out the one thing you can't run away from is yourself. His honesty was disarming. It was a raw, vulnerable admission that she hadn't expected. It was a mirror of her own experience, the feeling of being trapped by her past and her own choices. I thought my work was enough, Eleanor confessed in return. I thought if I could help enough people, if I could fix enough broken hearts, it would fill the emptiness in my own. The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge built of shared vulnerability. This wasn't a game of flirtation or a prelude to a physical encounter. It was a raw and profound exchange of emotional intimacy. Liam wasn't trying to conquer her. He was inviting her to connect. He was drawing her into a world where she didn't have to be perfect, where she could simply be. That's a lot of pressure to put on yourself, Eleanor, he said softly. You can't fix everyone, and you're not a machine. You're a person who deserves to be happy, to have a full life, outside of these walls. Eleanor felt a tear escape her eye, a single, hot tear that she quickly wiped away. She hadn't cried in years. But here, in the dark with Liam, she felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced. She felt seen and understood and accepted, not for what she did, but for who she was. I don't know what to do, she admitted, the words a genuine plea for help. I've built my life around a certain idea of who I am, and now I don't know who that is anymore. Liam took her hand, a simple, comforting gesture that sent a shockwave of warmth through her. You don't have to have all the answers tonight, Eleanor. You just have to be willing to ask the questions. And you're not alone. I'm here. His touch was not a prelude to anything physical, but a testament to his presence, his commitment to her emotional well-being. He was offering her a lifeline, an anchor in the storm. And in that moment, Eleanor knew that the old Eleanor, the one who lived behind a wall of professional detachment, was gone. The storm was still raging outside. But inside, a new and different kind of peace was beginning to settle. The seduction was complete, not of her body, but of her heart and mind, and she was ready to see where it would lead. The flickering emergency lights cast a golden, surreal glow over Eleanor and Liam, turning the clinical hallway into a private sanctuary. The storm outside raged on, a tempest of wind and rain, but inside, a profound stillness had settled between them. Liam's hand, warm and solid, still held hers. It was a simple touch, yet it was the most significant gesture Eleanor had experienced in years. It wasn't about desire, it was about presence. He was there, and she was no longer alone in the quiet fortress she had built for herself. I don't think I've ever felt this vulnerable before, Eleanor confessed, her voice thick with emotion. I'm the one who's supposed to be in control, the one who knows all the right things to say. But with you, I feel like I'm a patient on the other side of the couch, and I have no idea what to say next. Liam's thumb gently traced the back of her hand. That's because you're not in a therapy session, Eleanor. You're in a moment of genuine human connection. There's no script for this. We're just two people, stuck in a hospital, sharing a quiet moment. He wasn't trying to fix her or offer professional advice. He was simply acknowledging her feelings, validating her vulnerability. It was a more powerful form of therapy than any she had ever practiced. In that moment, the last of her walls came crashing down. The professional Dr. Vance, the woman who had all the answers, was gone. All that remained was Eleanor, a woman who was finally ready to admit that she didn't have to be perfect. You're right, she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. I'm so used to being the strong one, the one who holds everything together, but sometimes, even the strongest walls need a little help to stand. And sometimes, Liam added softly, the most beautiful part of a person is what's on the other side of those walls. He wasn't wrong. This newfound vulnerability felt terrifying, but also incredibly liberating. They spent the next hour simply talking, their voices low and intimate in the vast, empty space. They didn't talk about their jobs or their professional lives. They talked about their dreams, their fears, their pasts, and their hopes for the future. Eleanor learned about Liam's love for hiking in the mountains and his quiet sadness about the loss of his father. Liam learned about Eleanor's passion for classical music and her secret fear of being truly known by someone. It was an exchange of secrets, a quiet intimacy that transcended any physical encounter. They weren't moving closer in a physical sense, but their spirits were entwining. Each shared story, each quiet confession, was a step towards a profound and lasting connection. This wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow, deliberate build of trust and understanding. As the storm outside began to wane, replaced by a soft, steady drizzle, they fell into a comfortable silence. They had reached a point where words weren't necessary, just being in each other's presence was enough. Eleanor felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years, a quiet calm that replaced the constant thrum of her own anxiety. Liam finally broke the silence. "I'm glad the power went out," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "I don't think we would have had this conversation otherwise. We would have been too busy, too professional, too, you know." Eleanor nodded, a small laugh escaping her lips. "I know. We would have been a doctor and a cardiologist, and not Eleanor and Liam. And I like Eleanor a lot more," he said, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. The honesty in his gaze was breathtaking. He wasn't trying to flirt or to charm her. He was simply stating a fact, a truth he had discovered in the quiet darkness of a hospital hallway. And Eleanor believed him. She felt seen not as a prize to be won, but as a person to be cherished. As the first hint of dawn began to creep through the windows, casting a soft, gray light over the hallway, a part of Eleanor knew that everything had changed. The emotional walls she had built her life around had been shattered, not by force, but by a gentle, quiet understanding. The connection she had found with Liam wasn't a fleeting moment. It was a foundation for something real, something profound. She had stepped out of her carefully constructed world and into a new one, a world of vulnerability, of honesty, and of genuine human connection. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what she would find there. She was ready. The first light of dawn brought not just the end of the storm, but the return of reality. As the emergency lights in the hospital hallway flickered off and the normal fluorescence buzzed to life, the magical, surreal atmosphere of the night before evaporated. Eleanor and Liam stood in the harsh, clinical light, the easy intimacy they had shared now feeling like a dream. The unspoken rules of the professional world returned, creating a chasm between them. Eleanor's heart, which had felt so light just moments before, now ached with a familiar pang of anxiety. What had she done? She, Dr. Eleanor Vance, the bastion of professional detachment, had spent the night confessing her deepest fears to a colleague. She had let down her guard, and now she felt exposed, vulnerable, and deeply embarrassed. The easy rapport they had built in the darkness now felt like a fragile, breakable thing in the cold light of day. "Well," Liam said, his voice a little strained, "looks like the power's back on. We should probably get to work." "Right," Eleanor said, her voice a clipped, professional tone she hadn't used with him all night. "Patients will be arriving soon." The conversation, once so easy and open, was now punctuated by awkward silence. They walked back to their respective offices, the comfortable quiet of the night, replaced by a deafening chasm. Every step felt heavy, a deliberate move to put distance between them. Eleanor busied herself with her morning routine, her mind replaying the events of the night before. Had she said too much? Had she overshared? The quiet confidence she had felt in Liam's presence was gone, replaced by a gnawing self-doubt. When Liam walked by her office a few minutes later, she kept her eyes glued to her computer screen, pretending to be engrossed in her work. She heard him hesitate at her door, but he didn't say anything, and she didn't look up. The unspoken weight of their shared secret was a heavy burden. Later that morning, they had a scheduled meeting to discuss a shared patient. The meeting room, usually a place of sterile, professional conversation, felt charged with an unacknowledged tension. They sat across from each other, both of them hyper-aware of the other's presence. Eleanor found herself unable to focus, her mind replaying the feel of his hand in hers, the sound of his voice in the dark. "So," Liam said, breaking the silence, his tone carefully neutral. "Regarding Mr. Harrison's case." They discussed the patient's treatment plan, their words crisp and clinical. But every now and then, their eyes would meet, and a flicker of the intimacy they had shared would pass between them. It was a silent acknowledgement, a shared secret that made the professional pretense feel like a flimsy shield. Eleanor found herself speaking in short, clipped sentences, her body language defensive. She was trying to rebuild the walls she had so carelessly allowed to fall, but it was no use. The knowledge of what had passed between them was an invisible thread, pulling them together even as they tried to pull apart. When the meeting was over, Liam stood up, a lingering look in his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "I hope you don't regret last night." The question hung in the air between them, a fragile plea. Eleanor's first instinct was to say yes, to retreat into the safety of her professional identity. But she couldn't. The memory of the profound connection they had shared was too strong. "No," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't. It was real." A look of relief washed over Liam's face. "I'm glad, because I don't either." "I don't." He didn't try to touch her or prolong the conversation. He simply acknowledged the reality of what had happened and then left, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts. The moment of vulnerability had passed, and the awkwardness was still there, but now it was tinged with a new emotion, hope. The night had changed everything, and while the morning light had brought with it a sense of confusion and embarrassment, it had also brought with it the possibility of something more. The professional lines had been blurred, and they could never be drawn so cleanly again. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt a flicker of excitement for what was to come. She was no longer just the doctor. She was a woman navigating a new and complex relationship, and she was ready for the challenge. The professional distance that had once been Eleanor's sanctuary now felt like a prison. The awkwardness from the morning after the storm had slowly but surely begun to fade, replaced by a new, more complex layer of understanding. Eleanor and Liam continued to see each other in the hospital hallways, in the shared staff lounge, and in meetings. The polite nods and brief professional conversations were still in place, but beneath the surface, a silent conversation was taking place. Their eyes would meet across a crowded room, and a shared, knowing smile would pass between them, a silent acknowledgement of the secret they held. The shared intimacy of that stormy night had irrevocably altered their dynamic. They were no longer just colleagues. They were two people who had seen each other's vulnerability, who had shared their deepest secrets in the quiet glow of emergency lights. This newfound connection was both terrifying and exhilarating for Eleanor. She was a woman who had meticulously planned her life, but this new development was something she hadn't accounted for. It was a thrilling, beautiful, unknown. A week after the storm, Liam approached her office as she was packing up to leave. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and a little hesitant, "I was wondering if you'd be free for dinner tonight, not as Dr. Vance and Dr. Carter, just as Eleanor and Liam." Eleanor's heart fluttered in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. She could retreat back into her professional shell, or she could take a leap of faith. The choice was clear. The old Eleanor would have said no, citing a busy schedule or a work deadline. But the new Eleanor, the one who had felt the liberating power of vulnerability, found herself saying yes. "I'd like that very much, Liam," she said, her voice soft but firm. That evening, they met at a small, unassuming Italian restaurant in a quiet Boston neighborhood. The setting was a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the hospital. The warm lighting, the soft murmur of conversation, and the rich scent of garlic and basil created an atmosphere of comfort and intimacy. Over plates of pasta, they didn't talk about their jobs. They talked about their lives. They shared stories, laughed, and discovered a new layer to their connection. Eleanor learned about Liam's passion for cooking and his dream of one day opening his own restaurant. Liam learned about Eleanor's love for art history and her secret desire to travel the world. The conversation was easy and natural, a continuation of the intimate exchange they had begun in the hospital hallway. At one point, Liam reached across the table and took her hand. "Eleanor," he said, his eyes filled with a sincere warmth. "I know this is all new for you, and I want to be honest with you. The other night wasn't just a moment of shared vulnerability. For me, it was the beginning of something real. I want to get to know you, not just as a colleague, but as a person." Eleanor's heart felt full. He wasn't rushing her, wasn't pressuring her. He was simply laying his cards on the table, offering her a chance at a genuine connection. "I feel the same way, Liam," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I've spent so long being a certain person, a certain way, and you saw past all of that. You saw me." The rest of the evening was a gentle exploration of their new relationship. There was no pretense, no awkwardness, just two people discovering the beautiful, unwritten future that lay before them. The night didn't end with a dramatic kiss or a passionate embrace. It ended with a quiet understanding, a promise of more to come. As Liam walked her to her door, he didn't try to cross a boundary. He simply held her gaze, a silent question in his eyes. Eleanor, her heart full of a new and